Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jenna and I'm going to be your host this afternoon. I'm Adopt a Stream State Coordinator and I'm really excited that you're all here. So just before we start, a few Zoom housekeeping reminders. I mentioned this before, but just a reminder that the session is being recorded and you're going to remain muted with your video off for the duration of the webinar. But if you need to get our attention for any reason, there's a raise hand button that you should find at the bottom of your screen. So just click that button. We'll see it in our screen and we can send you a message and figure out how we can help. And then if you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box, which is also an option that you should find on the bottom of your screen. And then we'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. But you can pop them in there at any time that works for you.
Awesome. Yeah, and my name is Bailey Craps. I am also an Adopt a Stream State Coordinator. And for those of you who may not be familiar with our program, we are a citizen science program that trains volunteers to monitor water quality across the state of Georgia. And we have an annual conference every year, Confluence, which you are all a part of here today and hopefully have been engaging with us previously this month and will continue to do so through the whole month of August. So we're happy to have you today. This is our first virtual anything pretty much, but first virtual conference. So we appreciate y'all bearing with us as we, kind of navigate these new virtual waters together. But we're so happy to have you here. So thanks.
Well, without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker for today, this legislative update. It's Kevin Jeselnik, as you can see on our panelist screen, and he's the General Counsel for Chattahoochee Riverkeeper. He supports Riverkeeper leadership in coordinating and implementing CRK's programs, monitoring and protecting water quality on both the river and its tributaries. He serves as the legislative team chair for the Georgia Water Coalition, which is a network of more than 260 organizations that join together to lobby and monitor legislative activities of the Georgia General Assembly. They oppose rollbacks to environmental laws and also advocate for new protections for Georgia's waterways. He has a degree in journalism from the University of Georgia and received his law degree from Georgia State University College of Law in 2012. So welcome, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks to everyone for joining in. Appreciate the introduction. Let me see if I can get the screen up, get this started. Do you see the PowerPoint slideshow?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint slideshow.
There we go. Okay. So the plan here is to kind of walk through environmental legislation that passed, that failed, that was taken up during the 2020 legislative term. My name's Kevin Jeselnik, as Jenna said. I'm General Counsel, Legal Counsel for Chattahoochee Riverkeeper. I'll talk a little bit about who Riverkeeper is and what the Georgia Water Coalition is for a second before I get into legislation. So our organization was founded 26 years ago in 1994. We're part of the broader Waterkeeper Alliance, which is an affiliate group with, I think, about 360 water advocacy groups all over the world now. Here in Georgia and some on Alabama and elsewhere, we have about 10,000 members for Chattahoochee Riverkeeper with 3 offices. Our headquarters here in West Midtown in Atlanta in the Proctor Creek watershed. We have an office in downtown Gainesville near Lake Lanier and one in downtown LaGrange near West Point Lake. We have a broad array of programming. Many of you hopefully are familiar with our own water quality monitoring program. We do a lot of work with Adopt a Stream volunteers and also have our Neighborhood Water Watch program, where we have approximately 200 sites around the watershed that are monitored throughout the year for bacteria and other sources of pollution. So I'll skip over this, but very briefly, our watershed covers approximately 430 miles from North Georgia to the Florida line, where it runs into Lake Seminole and joins with the Flint River to form the Apalachicola. And we have been deeply involved in legislative work really since our inception. Our founder, Sally Bethea, really saw the value in working with partners and citizens across the state to advance statewide water laws, water policies that were protective of water quality and that helped conserve water quantity. What's good for others around the state is only going to be good for the Chattahoochee River watershed as well. So even as a nonprofit, we can lobby. I register as a lobby every year and work at the Capitol with a big team of partners. And those partners are part of the Georgia Water Coalition. This is a loose affiliation of organizations. It's not an organized 501c3, but it is, it's composed of a number of 501c3 groups, all of the waterkeeper groups in Georgia, along with Chattahoochee, all of our brother and sister organizations, the Georgia Wildlife Federation, as well as a number of faith-based groups, homeowners associations, lake owners associations, businesses, law firms. A really broad array of partners form the Water Coalition and come together as a legislative team that I facilitate and chair each year to have weekly meetings during the legislative session and be present with lobbyists in the building throughout the session, kind of keeping an eye on what the legislators are doing with regard to water in the state and with other environmental issues in the state, and to advance some priorities that we adopt every year and try to move forward through the legislative process to advance protective water laws and water policies. So you all know that this is oh man, if anyone begins a talk about this with the word unprecedented again, I'll probably go crazy, but this has been a most unusual year that translated to an incredibly unusual legislative session that had a stop and a start and a resumption. But typically the legislature meets in two-year sessions. There's a first term and a second term, and bills can be introduced in either the first or second term, but must pass both chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and be signed by the governor to become law. That has to happen in that 2-year window. So if something is introduced in 2019, it could take until the end of this 2020 session to be passed by both chambers and still become law. But if something is introduced during these terms and doesn't pass, then it has to be reintroduced. The process completely starts over when the new 2-year term will begin in 2021. So the 2020 term, this session began like normal. I think it's usually the second or third Monday of the year. So it began on January 13th. 2 months later, about 27 or 28 days into the 40-day session. That is kind of the set number of days of legislative days that are convened each year. The session was suspended due to the coronavirus pandemic, and we had a 3-month break before the session resumed. The session essentially had to resume in June because per the Constitution, the legislature has one thing they really have to do every year, and that is pass the next year's fiscal year budget. So by the end of June, the legislature has to set the fiscal year budget. So the 2020-2021 FY budget needed to be done. It was not agreed upon by March 13th when the session was suspended. So they had to get back together and hammer that out, which they did by June 26th. And it managed to take up a number of other pieces of legislation in those 2 weeks where they resumed, which was good and bad, and also kind of surprising. Many people thought they would get together for the limited purposes of completing the budget, which was definitely the primary focus, but they worked on a number of other issues as well. Just some headlines about, just kind of the unusual way the session played out. This whole session started under a bit of gray skies because the Governor Kemp announced in 2019 that every budget was going to have to come to the table when the session began, proposing 4% to 6% cuts in their agencies. So that included the Environmental Protection Division and other divisions of the Department of Natural Resources. But when the session began, there was a lot of back and forth where the legislators didn't necessarily want to accept this recommendation, even though most of the agencies did come forward with proposed budget cuts. So until the pandemic really took hold, there was some resistance to this to the perceived budget woes and potential cuts. But as we saw with the pandemic and the delay in income tax filings and just kind of general downturn and slowdown of the economy, the budget cuts became a reality. And when they did resume, the governor was asking for agencies to cut those budgets up to 14%. In the end, it looked like most of the agencies did negotiate around about 10% budget cuts, which is absolutely unfortunate, obviously, but better than 14%. And it doesn't look like the agencies we're most concerned about here at EPD had layoffs. They kind of eliminated unfilled positions and took other kind of programmatic steps to avoid losing manpower or really having to do any agency-wide furloughs to this point. So despite all of this, and it has been a tough year for so many people in so many ways, it's been a very good year for Georgia's environment in the context of legislative work. I've been doing this since 2015, so not very long, but this was my 6th session that I've worked through, and it was certainly the most successful year from my perspective in the Georgia Water Coalition, advancing its priorities and working with a really diverse base of not just elected officials, but citizens across the state to kind of advance our goals, to push back against some potential rollbacks that were introduced during the session. So, you take with the good with the bad, and we had kind of a year for the records for the Georgia Water Coalition, and maybe when I go through this, it doesn't seem that way, but in our experience as doing this over the past 20 years with many of my colleagues who have been doing it that long, this is a long game that we play, and a lot of our priorities take many years to gather a hold in the public consciousness and to kind of then translate it into interest among legislators and to get buy-in from the legislators to kind of take up our measures. So we felt like we saw a lot of payoff this year. The first piece of legislation I want to talk about is kind of a legislative priority of the Georgia Water Coalition that we have been working on for about 14 years now among different partners in the Water Coalition. And this deals with what we're calling trust fund honesty, but it really is addressing kind of a gap in how monies that are sent to state-created trust funds are spent. So there are trust funds for a variety of programs across the state of Georgia, driver education, public defenders, many things that don't deal with the environment, but there are a couple that specifically deal with environmental issues that we're very keen on seeing fully funded. And so there's these trust funds one's called the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund and one is called the Solid Waste Trust Fund. And they're funded by, for example, every time you buy a new set of tires for your car, $1 per tire is supposed to go into the trust funds to help clean up scrap tire dumps that we see everywhere. The money is supposed to be kind of collected by the state. It's not a tax, it's a fee that is collected when you buy tires, and it's supposed to be collected by the state and held to be disseminated to local governments that can then use it for scrap tire cleanups, to clean up those dumps we see on vacant properties along the sides of roads and a lot of wetlands and streams. There's also a hazardous waste trust fund that collects fees that are intended to clean up hazardous waste sites that we have well over 100 sites on the state's hazardous site inventory that many of which are more than 20 years old and really need to be addressed. And the trust funds fees are supposed to be collected to help parties and local governments address those hazardous waste sites. There's also some fees in the solid waste fund that are supposed to help local governments deal with local governments who have municipal solid waste landfills in their jurisdictional boundaries within their county. The solid waste trust fund is supposed to basically have monies earmarked to help them deal with any environmental impacts they feel from those landfills that are situated in their boundaries. But what we found over time is that there's no constitutional or legal requirement that requires these fees, once they're collected, to be routed directly to the trust funds. So over many years, well over $200 million have been what I would say misappropriated, but redirected by the General Assembly from these trust funds into the general budget. So used to kind of fill gaps or used for other purposes for which they're not intended. We've always disagreed with that because this isn't a tax that should be allowed to be kind of played with as part of the general budget. This is a fee that's being collected specifically to fund these trust funds. And the gap has been that there's no requirement that the legislators dedicate these fees to the trust funds. So they're not required by law to route the money directly to the trust funds, which we think they should be, or they should at least be, the legislators should have the authority to route the money to the trust funds, to say that the money has to go to the trust funds. So that's what we've been working on for a number of years, and have introduced various resolutions over the past decade to a lot of broad bipartisan support. And in 2020, we finally did it. So this is something that is a cause for celebration for all Georgians, I think, but certainly the culmination of a lot of work by many Georgia Water Coalition partners. But we're not there yet. What we passed is called House Resolution 164, and what it calls for, it's a resolution that calls for a constitutional amendment. And so to get this passed, we had to get 2/3 of the majority of both chambers, which we did, but now it goes to the ballot this November. So this will be one of 3 questions that you have at the end of your ballot in November after you select your candidates. We really are working hard over the next few months to build yes votes for, to build support for. And the reason we have to do this is because to dedicate fees at the legislature, to actually dictate where monies go, you have to do that via constitutional amendment. So the constitutional amendment simply allows the legislature to dedicate these fees. So they still have to take the next step once this is adopted by Georgians in November. The legislators still have the next step of basically passing a law that that says, yes, we will be dedicating these fees. So we can't even get to that point unless we pass this issue on the ballot. So we've done polling that has shown overwhelming support among all types of Georgians for this kind of trust fund honesty that we talk about. So we're very confident, but we're going to be working very hard in October, particularly to educate Georgians about this and encourage yes votes on this ballot measure. And we hope all of you will be looking for it when you fill out your absentee ballots or your in-person ballots in November. These are different hazardous sites and landfills across Georgia that could be impacted by kind of the existence of more funds, the funds that should be in these, the fees that should be in these trust funds that should be being distributed to local governments and entities to clean up hazardous waste sites and things of that nature. So it's, this one's a little outdated. We were certainly concerned about the impact of the budget cuts kind of in their, how they may impact the passage of this resolution, but we were able to pass the resolution. So we're working hard in the Georgia Water Coalition. This is maybe a little inside baseball that I'm going to move past, but we're working really hard on a campaign over the next few months to go into November. And if you have questions about that, you're going to have my contact information at the end, and you're welcome to reach out. We'd love to work with anyone who wants to do the work in their community to kind of just inform voters about this ballot measure. Jesse DeMondreau and Chapman is the Coosa River Basin Riverkeeper, and he's kind of our lead in the Water Coalition on this issue. There's his information. I'll give you just a second, but also you're more than welcome to reach out to me as we're all working on this together. So that is one of the Water Coalition's priorities that we've been working on for many years, that we've decided to put a lot of resources behind, and we managed to succeed this year and pass that resolution. Another issue we've been working on since 2015 or so is dealing with coal ash, which is kind of the waste left over from burning coal combustion residuals for coal-fired energy generation across the state. For decades, coal ash has been kept in unlined pits along Georgia's rivers. There's 3 power plants along the Chattahoochee, and I think roughly 8 others that have coal ash pits along other rivers in Georgia across the state. So we've all long been concerned about impacts from this material, which we know has heavy metals present in it and has been sitting mixed with stormwater for many decades, turning into wastewater, turning into sludge. And now that Georgia Power utilities want to deal with this waste stream, they have to get that wastewater out of the pits and then do something with the sludge and dried ash that's left over. And so that whole process, this is a very broad overview of it, that whole process has been subject of interest for all of our partners for a number of years. Because right now, Georgia Power is moving to close the coal ash pits, the coal ash ponds that they have at many of their power plant sites in a number of different ways. Some of these are literally being closed where they're being excavated, the waste is being removed, and it'll be stored in permitted landfills that are aligned to collect the liquid waste material that may be running away from the waste piles. But some of them are going to be closed in place, just left in kind of consolidated unlined pits nearby rivers in Georgia, including the Chattahoochee. And we have a lot of concerns about the long-term impacts of leaving this toxic waste that has a lot of heavy metals in it right by our rivers in these unlined pits that are mixing with groundwater, that can mix with groundwater, that can then migrate through the ground into drinking water wells, into nearby streams, into nearby rivers. Very broad overview of our concerns, and here's the Georgia Water Coalition's position that we've had for 5 or 6 years now. This is a confusing screen, but it basically just shows landfills that have requested and are in fact accepting coal ash. We think coal ash should be stored in permitted landfills, but obviously we want them to be stored in landfills that are well above groundwater, that are well away from surface waters. So that's what we're looking for when we see the waste being moved to landfills. A number of these other sites are the actual power plants where the waste is stored in coal ash ponds, coal ash pits. There's approximately 80 million tons that's currently, or I guess there's activity, but when this all began a few years ago, when the closure efforts began a few years ago, there was more than 80 million tons of coal ash in these unlined pits in Georgia. I think approximately 50 million tons will be closed in place, will be left in these unlined pits. And approximately 30 million tons of that is in the 3 power plants in the Chattahoochee River Basin. So this is certainly an item of great interest for Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, but really for all of our partners across the state. So this year was the first year, since 2016 when we first advanced legislation that a bill that actually addresses coal ash passed the legislature. So we were very excited by the passage of Senate Bill 123. The bill actually addresses coal ash in regard to its storage in solid waste landfills, in municipal solid waste landfills. So very broadly, whenever waste is sent to a landfill, there is a dollar amount per ton that is paid by the person taking that waste to the landfill. And a small amount of that, called a host fee, is paid to the local county that the landfill is situated in. Again, that's kind of like the solid waste trust funds. This host fee is just a dollar per ton in the past that went to the local government in case there were any issues with the landfill. They'd have some money in their general funds to deal with those issues. A couple years ago, the host fee was increased to $2.50. But a carve-out was created so the host fee, the money paid to counties per ton of waste into the landfill in the county, it costs $2.50 per ton for regular household waste and other kinds of waste to go to that landfill. But there was only, it stated only $1 per pound for coal ash. for a number of reasons. Georgia Power anticipated sending a lot of coal ash to landfills and wanted to keep that number low. Also, there is a lot of out-of-state waste of coal ash waste coming into our state. And that's long been our great concern, is that we don't want to have the cheapest cost in the Southeast for other states to send their coal ash waste into our landfills. And we felt like keeping this host fee at $1 just sent the message that Georgia was open for business for out-of-state waste generators to send toxic coal ash waste into our landfills. We have enough of it within our own borders. We don't need North Carolina and South Carolina Duke Energy coal ash waste being shipped into Georgia. A lot of it already has been. We know that R&B landfill in Banks County, Georgia, and Northeast Georgia saw a lot of coal ash waste come in from the Carolinas, and they were very concerned about that. So anything we can do to disincentivize out-of-state waste coming into Georgia, we like to see, and anything that can at least try to accurately reflect the potential long-term costs of storing this waste at the landfills. So we think it's super reasonable that Senate Bill 123 has already been signed by the governor, and it essentially evens out that host fee. Coal ash costs $2.50 per ton, just like a regular bag or regular ton of household waste costs $2.50 per ton for the host fee for the counties. Very excited just to get traction on legislation around coal ash. A lot of people got this issue and have a lot of concerns about kind of the approach to dealing with it over the next few years. So does it do everything we want to do? No, but it was nice to see traction, and we think this is a good piece of legislation. Just about kind of fairness and the fees that we're seeing come in for the cost of transporting and storing waste. There were a number of other bills addressing coal ash, the most we've ever seen in one session, and they moved more than they ever have. We had a number of bills that made it past crossover day. Crossover day usually falls in day 26, 27, 28 of the legislative session. And what crossover day is the last day that a piece of legislation can get out of its originating chamber. So if a bill started in the House, it has to pass the House by crossover day, vice versa for the Senate. Once it passes at crossover day, then it still has to pass the other chamber. But if it doesn't make it, if a House bill doesn't make it out of the House by crossover day, it's done for that session. So this is always kind of a make or break point, 2/3 of the way through the legislative session. And we had a number of pieces of legislation that made it through. House Bill 93, made it all the way to the Senate floor and didn't get a vote, but it would just require Georgia Power and EPD to provide advance notice before the utility started draining the wastewater from these coal ash ponds. House Bill 929 would have kind of codified some existing rules that call for 30 years of monitoring of the groundwater around coal ash ponds. That should be happening anyway under some existing state and federal rules, but some legislators wanted to see that codified. Senate Bill 123 passed, and Senate Bill 384 we'll talk about later, but was an interesting piece of legislation that was trying to protect Georgia's blackwater rivers like the Satilla River from threats that could be posed by landfills and coal ash storage. The bills that we really want to see move forward, that we're very passionate about at the Georgia Water Coalition, that we think meaningfully respond to some of the issues posed by coal ash, were House Bill 756 and Senate Bill 297. These called for the excavation of coal ash from these unlined pits and movement to storage in lined landfills. So those didn't get a lot of traction, but we did get a lot of attention on those issues. There were a lot of members of the Juliet, Georgia community around Plant Share who have a lot of concerns and have some water quality data from their drinking water wells, where they're concerned about heavy metals in their wells and concerned about the connection to coal ash ponds around Plant Share, Lake Juliet. So that was one of the things that have spurred this call to excavate and remove this waste stream from the groundwater. This is just some of the collateral. We've been working on this issue at the Georgia Water Coalition for a long time, and we work very hard to educate Georgians and to call them out to action to to get them to take action through some of our action alert programs that we have, like protectgeorgia.org. So just we're working on coal ash throughout the year, but if you follow Georgia Water Coalition on Facebook, you can see a lot of our calls to action throughout the legislative session. So we work on priorities throughout the year, throughout many years, these kind of proactive pieces of legislation we'd like to see enacted. You know, we got 2 pieces of legislation passed in 2020 that were part of our priority efforts, which is something we're super excited about. But one of the things that we also work on every year, and I think something that the Water Coalition has had great success at doing, is opposing rollbacks. These are laws that are introduced throughout sessions that we feel kind of weaken Georgia's environmental laws and water protection laws. And there was an interesting one that was introduced in 2019 and played out in 2020, House Bill 545, which was a change to an existing law called the Georgia Right to Farm Act, Right to Farm Law. And so we think this has a direct nexus with water quality, even if it doesn't seem so at first. So it's something we worked very hard on. We think a lot of sound laws that protect water quality also protect and enhance property values. And so that's a line of messaging we think can be very successful when we're talking to a broad base of people across the state, not just progressives in Atlanta, but conservatives in Albany and Peach County and across the state. And we think this one hit a sweet spot, even though it's quite a difficult situation and with a lot of passion on both sides. This is trying to keep this from, again, going too inside baseball, but there's an existing right to farm law that essentially says if you've lived in Georgia and owned a piece of property and have been farming for more than a year, new people can't move in next door to you and sue you because they don't like that you have a settling pond, or you have a lot of hogs or chickens, and there's an odor in the air because of their waste or the food, or because just the way that livestock can smell. That's been around for a long time. We think it actually makes sense to kind of protect existing farmers against suburban sprawl. We think about areas in the Chattahoochee around Noonan that used to be very rural and are now getting exurban and built up. If you've been there for 50 years, even if or 10 years and doing what you do, and a subdivision goes in on 300 acres next door, those new property owners shouldn't get to kind of dictate what you do, as long as you're following the law. You're not breaking the law. You're just engaging in agricultural activities. We thought that law made sense. House Bill 545 kind of tried to flip that on its head. In large part, we felt, to shift the balance of power to large corporate livestock operators. This bill didn't originate in Georgia. It has been introduced in North Carolina, Nebraska, many states, kind of an effort from the American Farm Bureau and other entities to make it easier for a new operation that might have 10,000 cattle or 10,000 hogs, might allow them to move in to an area where they're surrounded by small farmers, small residential areas, rural areas, but create a big problem because of the size of their operations. Under existing law, if they were the newest property owner to come in, then the people that have been living there for a long time, that moved in that had been around for a long time and were impacted by that new operation, they could sue for nuisance if there was like interference with the enjoyment of their property by the odors. Or with these large livestock operators, we see this in North Carolina, where there's now 10 million hogs. It's kind of grown exponentially in the past decade in North Carolina. The kind of proliferation of hog farms have created a lot of problems for rural property owners, for other farmers who have been there for a long time. And the problems can be with how you treat all of the waste that these animals produce. And that can be treated in large settling ponds, these lagoons that can be formed and get very, very nasty. And then that wastewater can be land applied, where it's essentially sprayed over farmland. And that spray can trespass, can leave property and land on farmland and properties and homes owned by neighbors, or even just the odors and the flies and the other vectors that can be created by the operation of a huge scale of livestock and the waste they produce, can create those kind of impacts on neighbors, but also these lagoons can overflow, the land application can oversaturate, and then this waste that is full of contaminants can run into nearby streams and rivers and lakes. So we think this is a water quality issue. If these large operations are kind of invited to expand across Georgia, and there's no checks on kind of the size and scope at which they operate. So we opposed 545. And what we did is work with, rural conservative farmers across the state that have owned property for 50 years, for 3 generations, that saw how some have seen firsthand how a large livestock operation nearby has impacted their property and the creeks and the ponds on their property. And some just can foresee the impacts on Georgia farmers, family farmers, small operators by these large operations being able to move in and kind of with unfettered limits. We got a lot of attention on this issue because of the partners we worked with. We even, this is just a really great, Margie McCree is a wonderful and funny woman who wrote an op-ed that kind of opposed this and really drew a parallel between kind of right to farm and right to bear arms in a really interesting way, but just a way to connect with Georgians that maybe someone like I am not going to think about. So we found people who saw this the way we did, but came from completely different backgrounds than some of our team, and used them to reach out to legislators, and had a great success. This passed the House within like 3 days of it being introduced back in 2019. It was kind of a stealth mode bill that was introduced in a committee on a Wednesday and voted out of the House on a Friday, which happens sometimes. But we were able to, for over a year, to basically keep it stalled in the Senate with our concerns about it and with all the Georgia citizens that opposed it, and eventually had it amended in the Senate. But it did pass the Senate in the last week of the session. But we had it amended in a way that we still weren't happy with, but had weakened it some. And so no one was happy. The people who wanted the bill didn't like the amendments, and the people who didn't like the bill, the senators and representatives who saw the problems with the bill, still weren't happy. So what it did was essentially just languish in the House until the session ended, which is a win. Sometimes it's, victory by attrition, or just waiting out, watching the clock wind down. That can happen at the legislative session. It happens every year. They can only pass so many bills before midnight on the 40th day. I'm just going to go through just a few other pieces of legislation, and we should have plenty of time. I know that I've seen some questions pop up, and I'll be happy to chat through any of these pieces of legislation. I mentioned Senate Bill 384. There are other people who know a lot more about that bill, but I do think it's an interesting piece of legislation. There is currently a landfill proposed in Brantley County, in a site that is very close to the Satilla River and near wetlands, and just what the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper and other parties down there, a lot of citizens in Brantley County don't think that the site is suitable for a landfill. So Senator William Ligon, you've seen his name a lot this session, but he really took up a passionate interest in a lot of these issues over the past couple of years. Came up with a bill that essentially would prohibit landfills from blackwater rivers, just kind of recognizing the unique nature of these beautiful rivers in South Georgia, and their kind of need to remain pristine and protected from a lot of the potential sources of contaminants that you may see from a landfill being sited very close to them. So this bill had a lot of traction, made it through the Senate, but ultimately didn't pass the House. But there was a lot of interest. It got 2 hearings in the House Natural Resources Committee, and I think made it through the House Natural Resources Committee, which is a feat unto itself, but did not get a vote by the House. But is something that I think is going to be taken up again and is worth considering. It's time that I think the state starts recognizing kind of the unique ecology of some of these rivers we have and protecting them from anticipated impacts. a bill that did pass and has been in the works for a number of years is just a fun recognition of the shoal bass as the official Georgia riverine sport fish. I think the largemouth bass is the state fish, but Representative Debbie Buckner near Columbus, Representative Trey Rhodes here, who sponsored it this year, the Flint Riverkeeper has been working on this for a number of years. It's just an effort to recognize kind of the unique shoal bass, its unique situation in Georgia. It's one of the most popular sport fish in Georgia because it allows you to fly fish it. You can do that up and down the Chattahoochee and in the Flint River and the shoals of the Flint and other rivers. Just, certainly for our Adopt a Stream volunteers, maybe something of interest to you that we're recognizing the shoal bass in a way. It doesn't really imbue any additional protections on the fish, but it's just celebrating something that is, uniquely Georgia. Just a couple other bills that are more air related, but environmental bills that were passed in 2020. You may have heard about ethylene oxide because of issues with a facility in Cobb County. There's multiple facilities in Newton County and other places across the state. It's used in sterilizing medical equipment, and kind of the literature and problems in Illinois, and then kind of more science, more research into this issue showed that it had a lot of air emission impacts, a lot of potential impacts on surrounding communities, and needed to be curbed. It didn't really have a lot of requirements for air emission standards at state law, not at EPA level, at federal law either. Everyone's kind of a little late to the game on this particular emission from this medical sterilization, medical tool sterilization process. But a bill that just requires written notification of unpermitted releases, just more public notice was passed. I think that the administration and some of the floor leaders in the Senate thought it was too early to try to ram through any sort of emission standards, because EPA at the federal level and EPD are catching up on that. But this is a pollutant that is going to be getting a lot of attention in Georgia, particularly because of the communities surrounded have a lot of concerns. Another issue, there's an interesting bill that there's, I guess, a practice of was proposed in North Georgia of burning these kind of creosote-soaked cross ties, and it was going to create a lot of air emissions that wouldn't be properly treated, and that were creating a lot of concern in North Georgia. And this bill passed fairly easily with broad support from a lot of the legislators who cover the districts in North Georgia where this operation was proposed. But we thought that had some nexus with water quality as well. If you're going to be storing these chemically treated cross ties for a long time and then burning them, what happens to the refuse from the burning? So we were glad to see that pass. That's the broad summary of the most of the pieces of legislation in dealing with water and with the environment this year. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Yes, thanks so much, Kevin. That was a really awesome presentation. I know as someone who is relatively new to Georgia, it was very informative for me as to what issues people are talking about in Georgia Water Coalition is kind of fighting for and advocating for. So thank you so much. We do have some questions in the Q&A, so we can go ahead and start addressing those. But if anyone has any questions kind of as we're going through things or any follow-up questions, please again, just put them in the Q&A and we'll keep addressing them as time permits. So the first question is from Betty, and she asked, does the fee legislation also apply to professional licensing fees?
Betty, no, I don't think so. This is I can't say with certainty, but I don't think so. What the fee legislation addresses is it gives the legislature the authority to dedicate the fees that are already being collected for a number of trust funds to those trust funds. So to say we have to send every dollar that is collected to the trust fund that it's being collected to support, I don't think that's that applies to professional licensing fees, because I don't think those are housed in any trust funds. And so this only deals with these trust funds the trust funds are already created by statute. It's just that the requirement to route all of the fees to the trust funds isn't required by statute yet. And now we'll be able to do that after we all vote yes in November.
Thank you. Our next question is from Kaylee. She says, does Georgia Power have to submit results of human health or ecological risk assessments to Georgia EPD or any other regulatory agency, state or federal?
Georgia Power is required by the federal coal combustion residual rules that were passed in 2016 and by state coal combustion residual. That just is another word for coal ash for this waste. For the coal ash rules and regulations that were enacted in 2016 at the state and federal levels they required background monitoring of groundwater before they started the closure process, and will require monitoring ongoing as they close and after they close these unlined pits. The monitoring is only required on the Georgia Power plant property. So there's no required monitoring of the groundwater adjacent to or down gradient from the power plant sites where the coal ash is stored. So that is kind of where the concern about the presence of the pollutants, migrating through the groundwater off-site onto other properties, particularly properties that may be relying on drinking water wells. So there is some monitoring. There's data that already exists that Georgia Power has published and EPD has published, and we're monitoring that whenever it is published, but always looking to gather more data about potential off-site migration.
Thanks, Kevin. The next question is from Cartagena, who asked, how do you get to the point where you're creating these bills? Do you request meetings with City Hall as an organization, 501c3 or not?
That's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of, I benefit from a lot of people more experienced and smarter than me that have been working on this a long time, but it is a very long process, and it really starts with, you have to decide what you want. If you're pushing something proactive, and you have to find like-minded legislators who want to sponsor the bill. No bill can be introduced without an elected official who will sponsor it. They're a representative or a senator is who introduces a piece of legislation. We can have all the legislation we want dreamt up. We can write it so that it looks just like a bill and smells just like a bill, and nothing will come of it unless a legislator wants to support it and move it forward. So a lot of the work is in the in the foreground before a session commences. You have to identify the issues and come up with some, at least draft language and a justification for the legislation you want to pursue. And then you have to find legislators who are like-minded and who are passionate about the issue. And in Georgia right now, I mean, the simple fact is you need to have a Republican legislator who wants to carry the piece of legislation. And there are a lot of them who care very much about the environment, and the bills that passed this year were all sponsored by Republican legislators. So I only say that because it's an absolute reality that if you want a bill to get out of a committee and get to the floor and then pass across and get out of the next committee and get across the other chamber, it has to have Republican support, and it really has to have a Republican sponsor. The lead sponsor needs to be Republican, and the winds may change, it has in the past, but the party that has the majority numbers has to be behind the legislation. And so there's strategy and groundwork to all of that as well. And we're lucky with the Georgia Water Coalition that we have such a broad geographical reach among our members, and we can use the leaders of these organizations to make contact, or we can reach out to citizens who have relationships with them and have the same passion as all of us. And so, or we just have existing relationships with lots of legislators. But there's certainly a lot of groundwork, and we've made the mistake of going into day one of a session with a bill that we really like and realizing we were way too late, where we didn't have, you're not going to find sponsors, in day 15 when you're almost a third of the way through the session, or you're more than a third of the way through the session, who want to, all of a sudden turn a lot of their energy into a new issue. So you have to find them early.
Thank you, Kevin. We do have one more question, so if anyone has any others, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. But April's asking, what are your thoughts on the closing of oyster farming in Apalachicola, and is it a direct result of drought or misuse of water in Georgia?
This is I think it's devastating and absolutely sad and unfortunate this has happened. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Service essentially just made a recommendation that was adopted that they're going to essentially shut down oyster harvesting in the Apalachicola Bay until 2025. And this is for the purposes of helping this depleted population of oysters regenerate in the oyster beds that are there, in the bay. Riverkeeper has, we've inserted ourselves in whatever way we can into the tri-state water wars over the use of water in the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee Flint River Basin. Georgia, Florida, and Alabama have been fighting over this, trying to compromise on this and just working on this issue for more than 30 years now. And our main goal at the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper is just for a clean and plentiful river. So we're not on Georgia's side or Florida's side. We're working for the river to make sure that, Georgia, we don't want to see excessive use in the metro area that is growing so rapidly, but there has been some gains in water conservation efforts in the metro area over the past decade. There can certainly be more, and we're advocating for that all the time. There are a lot of improvements that can be made in how we regulate and monitor agricultural irrigation in Southwest Georgia, primarily on the Flint, but somewhat on the Chattahoochee as well. Georgia has a lot of strides it can make on just quantifying how much water we're pulling out of these wells and out of the river to irrigate crops in Southwest Georgia. So there's a lot Georgia can do. And there's also, some truth to the concerns about how Florida handled harvesting oysters in the Apalachicola Bay during droughts like the 2012 drought, where they saw the oyster fishery almost collapse. So there are problems on both sides. We do need to conserve more water in Georgia, and there have been a lot of gains made on that. So I'm not sitting here saying that no one's doing anything. One of the concerns we have with the kind of findings that are coming out of the Supreme Court litigation that's continuing, still ongoing, but has generally agreed with Georgia's legal arguments that the case should be dismissed, which I don't necessarily disagree with when you look at the legal arguments that Florida made in the case that it brought to the Supreme Court. If that case is ultimately dismissed, we don't want Georgia to consider their job done. We think that the metro area and Southwest Georgia need to continue to make gains on water conservation. They need to continue to better understand how much water they're using. So there's no letting Georgia off the hook, free and easy. And when I say Georgia, I mean, we're talking about a huge network of different water users, from municipalities and industrial operators to just commercial and residential water consumption down to agriculture. So there's gains that need to be made across all those. They can be driven by state policy, and we'd like to see that. I guess I just really hope that this successfully regenerates that oyster population. This had the support of most of the stakeholders in Florida. I'll note that a lot of the oyster, a lot of the folks in the oyster industry down there saw this as necessary. That doesn't mitigate the devastating impact it has on people who've been making their living off this. It's heartbreaking for a lot of people, but a lot of them saw it as necessary themselves. So the impacts of the Apalachicola were felt when there was a drought. So it definitely is a direct result of drought. And there are things we can do to mitigate how much it hurts when there is a drought, and that's what we need to keep doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. Are there any other questions? We have just a couple of minutes left if anyone has any questions. I don't see any pop in. But if you just think of one kind of while we're doing our closing remarks, feel free to put it in there. So yeah, we just have a few kind of reminders. The first is that if you haven't already, we're asking everyone who's coming to our sessions to join our Confluence Facebook group. it's like the closest we can get to all being together in this virtual space together. So Bailey will be putting these links in the chat, and so you can find the link in the chat. And also, if you follow us on Instagram or Facebook, we're also posting about Confluence on those social media platforms as well. And there are so many great sessions. This was such an informative session, and there are even more that are coming up. I know I'm personally excited. Tomorrow there's going to be a poster session where students and volunteers are presenting their research tomorrow afternoon, and then tomorrow evening there's going to be a water-themed trivia, which is going to be super fun. We're very excited about that. So look for the registration links for those on our Confluence registration page. Bailey also put that in the chat. And then, as always, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning too, we're recording all of these sessions. So if there's one you're interested in but you couldn't attend, then you can view it afterwards, and you can find that on our website as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cartagena asked a question during the presentation, but those will be available on our website. We're thinking indefinitely, but if they ever get moved or you can't find the links, you can always find them on our YouTube channel. You can just search Georgia Adopt a Stream on YouTube and find them there. But just another quick reminder that Georgia Adopt a Stream silent auction that goes along with Confluence every year is live, and it will continue to be live until the 31st. So feel free to jump on there and look at some of the great items that we have. There's some winery tours and mountain cabin stays, as well as some tickets local to whatever area of Georgia you're in. So feel free to check those out. Also, following the end of this session, you'll be directed to a survey, which we'd really appreciate your feedback on. It's quick five questions, just to kind of see what your experience has been with this session and your experience with Confluence so far. We appreciate any feedback that you have for us. And as always, if you're interested in getting involved or have questions about Adopt a Stream or anything that you heard here today, feel free to contact us, and we can also put you in touch with Kevin if you have any questions about that. So we just want to thank everyone for joining us today during this lunch hour, and thank you so much, Kevin, again, for joining us and giving such an impactful and informative session. So we really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.